What is up, gentlemen, and welcome back to another episode on the channel. On today's episode, I want to speak about a topic that's near and dear to my heart, and that is the topic of death. Why do we want to consistently be thinking about death on a day-to-day basis? In this episode, not only am I going to teach you how to think about death in a positive and constructive way, but ultimately I'm going to bring you into the world in terms of what death is and what significance it can have in terms of your life and how you cultivate strong, meaningful relationships with those around you. Number one, we have to understand is that the idea of death, the trope of death, the concept of death is consistently all around us. Death is not something that we can ever escape. It's something that's ingrained in culture and media and history. Death has been around us since day one. It's in every statue you touch. It's in every piece of art you look at. It's in every movie you watch. Death should be a constant reminder that your time here is finite, and ultimately, at some point, you and everything you know will end and will come to a conclusion. So what does this bring us into? Well, the idea that you could actually leave life at any moment. You could leave life today, you could leave life in 20 years, in 90 years. Ultimately, you don't control that. That is completely out of your control. So every interaction that you engage in, every conversation that you have, every moment that you live, the idea that your imminent death could come up at any moment in time should actually inform and determine what you do, what you say, because you really don't know that specific interaction could be your last. And it may seem like we are beating a dead horse because you obviously heard the idea before that you could die at any moment, live each moment as if it's your last. But most people, they really don't meditate enough on this idea. They don't really understand that it's less about enjoying life. It's more about living life in a way that's authentic and that's meaningful to you and those around you. So it's not only the experiences you have, but it's each moment that you live. Your life is the amalgamations of the seconds, the minutes, the hours, the days, the weeks, the months, and eventually the years that you live. So death should always inform. It should act as the backdrop for every major decision you make and every minor decision you make. It's not only the major decisions that death should inform, it's also the major decisions. What I want you to do is to change your relationship to death. Most people, when they look at death, they see this very far and distant esoteric concept that's intangible. And they believe that, okay, death is something that I'm moving towards, right? Eventually I will die. They understand that idea. But what they don't understand is actually death is not something that you're moving towards. Death is something that is moving towards you. Death is something that is happening to you right now. Just as the rose is able to bloom, it's in a cycle of life and death. Eventually it'll bloom and eventually it'll wither away. The same is true for you. You are decaying as we speak. And I want you to keep that in mind because that changes the relationship with the moment. When you look at death as a ongoing process, you understand that the way that you choose to live your minutes and your seconds, you're choosing to pay for that not only with your time, but really with your life. So you choosing to watch this video is a conscious decision. It should be a conscious decision that you're deploying X amount of life towards this thing. And that changes your relationship to everything. When you understand that every single interaction you have is something that you're paying for with your life, think of how that changes the stakes. You start to really prioritize who you spend time with, what you do, where you actually deploy your time to make sure that all of these things make sense in the grand scheme of things. Death is happening right now. It's something that we are not moving towards, but something that's moving towards us. We are dying every minute and every day. This ultimately changes your relationship with death. Next is that time is non-renewable. Just because you are born, people feel entitled to the minutes, the seconds, and the hours they live. When you feel entitled to something, you just say, tomorrow I will wake up. So what you do is you don't provide or you do not allocate value to that time. Most people are more than happy to waste hours, to waste days, to waste weeks because this is just something that's given to them. They become entitled to the time that they live. But understanding that time is not renewable, it has infinite value, right? Something that we cannot get back. Ultimately, you cannot put a value on time. And it's easy to say because a lot of people get paid minimum wage. So you could say that my time is worth $14 an hour, $20 an hour. But realistically, that same person, if they were to change their mindset, their actions, their habits, the way that they go about executing life, that same $14 can be worth $100,000, right? There's people that are making $100,000 every single day. They're able to do that because their mindset of how they approach life, how they deploy their life is different. So what's the difference between person X and person Y? It's the way that they chose to use that time. So the time there is still, both of them have the same amount of hours in the day, but the value that is allocated to this person is way different than the value allocated to this person. This is that mindset shift, is that your time is actually worth a lot more than you have been lied to and have been allowed to spend your time. Because if you're someone who's been allowed to waste your time, you have zero value for your time. So change your relationship to time. Understand that you really need to start to allocate a value to it, whether it's internal or external. Obviously, when you start internally, right? You can't tell someone, oh, my time is worth X, because you don't have the history to prove that. But as you start to build yourself up, as you change your mindset and your concept towards time, and you start to allocate and assign a larger dollar amount and a larger sort of impact amount to your time. 5 is very important. You need to try to find daily reminders of things that remind you of your death. So I'm someone who meditates a lot on my life, on my interactions, on how I would like to be remembered, on what I'm doing on a day-to-day basis, because it's an intensity that I just bring. It's an intensity that gives my life meaning and value. And I'm aware of the fact that many people don't share that specific way of looking at life, right? They may see it as too intense, but I've quickly understood that what brings me meaning is not necessarily what brings others meaning. Right? We live completely two different paths. So I try to consistently remind myself of my death, and I believe that you guys should as well. Why? Because it's very easy as humans to become complacent. The daily actions we take, sometimes as good intentioned as we are, we do need that little reminder, that visual cue, that auditory cue that just gets us back on track. I believe in stacking small wins to my advantage. That way I can get those bigger wins. So one thing that I do is, whether it's a statue, it's a coin, whether it's a wallpaper on your phone, just remembering that at some point you're gonna die, and that today could be your last, and it could not be your last, is just a very healthy way to really give you that extra push, that extra motivation, that extra gusto to go up and do the things that you need to do, and to consistently push towards the version of your life that you wish to have. Last is that you need to understand that we are all going to die. So everything is going to inevitably have a conclusion. The idea that you are entitled to tomorrow is a complete fallacy, because you really cannot control what happens to you today, what happens to you tomorrow. Just think of the last time that you've heard of someone that you know, or maybe someone that you're associated with, being given a fatal illness, right? A diagnosis that essentially sets them, and they could leave tomorrow, they could leave in a month. Same thing for you. You never know where the next tussle with death could be. And that uncertainty should really put you in a position where you're really assigning a understanding that your time is valuable, and that it's extremely important to be able to consistently assign a value to each moment that you live. Look at the sunset. Just because you get to enjoy the sunset every day, you may not be able to enjoy that specific sunset, right? January 3 or January 4, sunset at 6 p.m. That specific sunset is going to be the last sunset of that specific time, of that specific day that you ever get to do. That conversation you have with your parents, that conversation you have with your friend, specifically that one is the last one you'll ever be able to enjoy, specifically that moment. You may have different variations of those conversations, but that conversation is the last one. It's singular. It's one-to-one. And again, the idea that every single moment you live is actually a one of one, it should and it must change the way that you look at those moments. Guys, you've allowed yourself to be complacent. You've allowed yourself to set a low value for the days that you live, for the moments that you live. A healthy and positive reminder of death reminds you that, on the contrary, each moment that you live actually has a completely different connotation to it. Just because you've been allowed up until now, by the good graces of God, to waste your time does not necessarily mean that your time has no value. So hopefully you've enjoyed this episode. Let me know what your specific relationship to death is, and if you've ever been moved by this concept. For me, it's something that is near and dear to my heart, and I use it every single day to become a better person and to live the life that I know I need to live. Guys, thank you from the very bottom of my heart for tuning into this episode. Until next time, see you soon.